the most painful cave deaths ever.
Mossdale Cave Incident. It was June 24th, 1967, and 10 cavers were about to enter Mossdale Cavern to help clear some of the deeper passages and map them out. The two leaders of the group had already explored this cave before, which reassured everyone else. This particular cavern was known for its tight spaces and the very few areas where a person could fully stand. After a few hours inside, 4 of the cavers realized how difficult the cave actually was and decided to return to the surface. They noticed a cloudy sky, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The remaining cavers continued their descent until they reached the far Marathon Passage, which measured only 18 inches by 12 inches, with a small stream of water along the bottom. Everything seemed to be going well, and the group on the surface soon noticed that it had started raining, so they took cover. Initially, the rain did not seem concerning, but the cavers inside began to notice rising water levels. When the water became alarmingly high, they decided to end the day's work and head back, even though they were still 3 hours from the entrance. Meanwhile, the surface group spotted something terrifying. A lake of water had formed around the cave's entrance. The cavers inside had no idea how much water was about to flood the cave. The surface group ran to get help, while the cavers frantically tried to reach higher chambers. However, the water continued to rise, pressing toward their faces. Rescuers and hundreds of volunteers worked tirelessly, pumping water out of the cave and pumping oxygen inside.
It's such water!
Had found a safe chamber. Unfortunately, every one of the cavers drowned.
Every single one?
Tragedy.
That is accurate, terrifying.
1973, and a group of 9 diving experts had planned a dive at Mount Gambier's shaft sinkhole. This sinkhole had a unique feature. There was only a tiny opening leading to a cave with a lake 20 feet below. From this opening, a beam of light went down into the cave and onto the lake, which was extremely helpful for the divers' orientation. This beam was visible throughout most of the cave, unless divers ventured too deep into one of the 2 side branches. Everyone would stay within a 200-foot maximum depth range, so they could remain in the main chamber and still see the guiding light. This was their only plan. On the second day, however, 4 divers planned to go to the western section of the cave, aiming for a depth of 250 feet, which would have been a new record. This was deeper than initially intended and posed a significant risk because in 1973, divers were still using regular air cylinders rather than mixed gas tanks. For this reason, they had to be more cautious as they went downwards, because nitrogen narcosis might have settled in. As they went down, pushed the nitrogen into the bloodstream, producing a state of consciousness that is similar to when people are drunk. Keep in mind that these divers were not very experienced in cave diving. They were more accustomed to standard open water scuba.
You probably shouldn't try to do the cave diving then.
They started going downwards into the western section of the cave, and one experienced diver noticed that nitrogen narcosis was kicking in, so he immediately went back out. Several of them followed and went back to the surface as well, but 4 of them kept going, determined to set the record and get a quick look before resurfacing. After a minute or so, the group at the surface became concerned, realizing the 4 divers would soon exhaust their air supply. A few returned to the cave to find them, and they discovered a flashlight and a camera on the bottom, but no trace of the divers. There was a problem that we haven't yet mentioned: silt. The movements of the 4 divers stirred up the long settled silt into a sand cloud that would take a lot of time to settle back. This reduced visibility to less than an arm's length, removing any hope for orientation for the underwater divers. Without being able to see anything, oxygen running dangerously low, and nitrogen narcosis kicking in, the 4 divers drowned.
All 4 of them? They should have just not gone.
1983, and 2 students from Texas State University, named Richard and Clark, are about to enter Jacob's Well, an underwater hole that leads to an underwater cave. This hole seems relatively shallow, around 25 feet, and many people try to touch the bottom and then come up. However, this is just a deceiving appearance because it actually leads to another underwater cave with 3 chambers. The first 2 are relatively open and easy to get through, but the third one has a really small squeeze to get into it. If you manage to squeeze through, you'll enter a room that is 10 feet tall, and you'll see a really small hole at the farthest edge. Too small to pass.
Terrifying.
This small tunnel was just
I could even imagine wanting to do that.
Prior, 2 people died in it.
No thanks.
After they managed to get through, a rock slide filled with gravel blocked them.
Thanks.
Now, getting back to our 2 students, they were fairly experienced in normal diving, but not in cave diving, and they were trying to get their instructor certification in open water diving. Their instructor, Don, was an incredibly skilled and experienced diver, and he was the one who removed the 2 bodies we just talked about. He used to constantly warn everybody to stay away from Jacob's Well since it's deadly, and he even tried to cover up the small hole that leads to the 4th chamber with some cement. But other divers reopened it and left a message that said, "You can't keep us out." Don himself almost died in Jacob's Well. When he tried to enter the 4th chamber, a gravel slide trapped him in the tunnel. He almost resigned himself to death. His tank was empty, and he had swallowed some water when his survival instinct kicked in, and he started rapidly moving until he cleared enough gravel to escape. When he did, he saw his diving colleague extending a regulator for him to breathe. As he started resurfacing, the air inside his body expanded until he reached almost 4 times his normal body size. By the time
Oh,
he broke
wow.
the surface, he was screaming in pain. His belly was huge because his stomach had completely ruptured. These stories caught the
That must
attention
be
of Richard
so
and Clark,
painful.
who wanted to take a look for themselves,
Oh, I
even though
guess.
they didn't really know much about cave diving. On November 23rd, 1983, they went into Jacob's Well and reached the 3rd chamber where the small hole was located. Richard removed his tank to get through the hole and started going in while holding
Ah,
his
it's
tank. When Clark removed
horny.
his own oxygen tank and tried to get in, he saw Richard's face and noticed Richard didn't have the tank with him anymore and was suffocating. Clark quickly reached for the regulator and gave it to him, letting him breathe again. They started passing the regulator back and forth as they made their way out, and somehow they managed to get through the tight squeeze of the 3rd chamber.
Okay.
They then began making their way toward the exit until a terrifying sound caught their
Oh
attention.
my
A
gosh.
clank from their oxygen tank. Not only did this mean they'd hit a wall with the tank, so they were going the wrong direction, but it also meant the tank was almost empty. They
Oh,
realized
no.
they'd run into the false chimney in the 1st chamber, a tunnel that looks like it leads to the surface, but is actually a dead end. Clark managed to swim back to the surface and gasped for air.
Oh my
covering an
goodness.
incredible 75
This
feet
actually
with single
terrifying,
breath.
Bo.
Unfortunately, the same can't be said for Richard, who remained behind and drowned. When Clark called the police for
That's
assistance,
terrifying.
Don, the instructor himself, showed up and was stunned to see his students there. Gollum's Cave. It's August 18th,
He was probably
2005,
so
and a group of 5
concerned
friends
why they were
decided
even
to venture
there.
into the Gollum Cave, also called the Cave of Death,
The-
because of how
the Cave
dangerous
of
it was.
Death?
They
Why
reached
would I
the
wanna
entrance
go
at
here?
3 a.m., and one of the friends decided to wait for the others outside. They encountered their first problem when actually trying to get in, as they had to crawl through a small pool of water. After that, there was a fork going left and right, and they chose left, which led them to another small pool of water. This seemingly innocent
wow.
pool, however, actually led to another section of the cave through an underwater tunnel. The tunnel itself was really small, just 3 to 4 feet in diameter, and to get through it, you had to be completely submerged. This meant only
Kawili.
one person at a time could go in, and they had to swim about 15 feet. One by one, they started plunging into the pool of water to reach the other side of the cave, and once they made it, they discovered a section with about 3 feet of airspace. From the perspective of the friend who stayed
That
outside,
does
there
not
was no
sound too
or
fun.
light coming from inside the cave, and after a while he started to get worried. He went into the cave himself, but heard no noises and saw no lights. Not sure what to do, he first called some friends who had experience with caving, and then called the police. He couldn't have imagined what was happening inside. The 4 friends who went in probably realized that the 3 feet of airspace they'd reached had bad air, which is a term cavers use for
What's
air that
bad
doesn't have
air?
the normal balance of gases, meaning there's more carbon dioxide and less oxygen. This reduces
Oh,
your ability
no.
to think, move, and breathe properly, making the return swim through that narrow tunnel super risky. They tried to get back out one at a time, but the first person who went underwater was unable to find the exit hole before running out of breath. That happened because
Oh,
the
no.
increased carbon dioxide messed with her ability to hold her breath and think clearly. After 30 to 60 seconds, the second person went in and found the first one, and so on, until all of them got stuck in the tunnel. The police arrived
That's
and tried
actually-
to pump in oxygen
what?
and pump out
Oh my
water,
goodness.
while family and friends waited anxiously outside the cave. Unfortunately, it was all in vain. The bodies were later recovered, and the cave was eventually closed off with cement. If you want to discuss this video or
Oh my
suggest an
goodness,
idea for
that's
the next one,
so
join my
scary.
Discord. Link in the description.